this land to the Rocky Mountains.
It's time to travel this land with Canada's singing storyteller Whiz Bryant.
To the Great Lakes shine and travel this land.
On today's program, Whiz takes us on a trip to Newfoundland for a look at Canada's rugged maritime heritage and the story of our Atlantic fisheries in the tale of the Outport Man.
Outport. The word at least is familiar to many Canadians. It conjures up an image of a small, isolated community with its brightly painted houses perched on the rocky shore of a small cove somewhere up there along the vast fjorded coast of the biggest rock of all, Newfoundland. It conjures up images of the generic Newfoundlander, a hard-working but sometimes unemployed fellow, almost always an independent fisherman with a dialect that most mainlanders can barely understand and a distinctive culture and way of life that most mainland Canadians find both bewildering and fascinating.
Safe inside the harbor, safe inside her arms, this fisherman is weary of the storm. Though he's worked the big stern draggers in search of salty cod, this islander has come home to the wharf. And he has seen the seagulls fly, watched them come and go, following the boats that sail free. With your hand lines and your jiggers, you haul the fish away, like men who take their living from the sea. Haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, Outport man. Haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, Outport man.
Most Canadians have heard the hundreds of Newfie jokes, one of the most popular among Newfoundlanders being "What's black and blue and floating in the sea?" a mainlander telling Newfie jokes. Newfoundland was the last province to join Confederation and will remain so at least until the Northern Territories obtain provincial status. Some of our images of Newfoundland are correct, for the fisheries remain its greatest and most permanent resource, and its vibrant and unique culture has indeed been shaped by centuries of an isolated maritime way of life that still goes on today. It was the rich fishing banks off the coast of Newfoundland, the most famous being the Grand Banks, that first drew Europeans to cross the Atlantic almost 500 years ago. The codfish, still a staple of the fishing industry, was the most plentiful. It was easy to catch, and dried and salted, it was easy to preserve and transport back to the distant European ports. Present-day Newfoundlanders are descendants of the early English and Irish fishing fleets. Small communities or fishing stations began to take root in the harbors of Newfoundland in the early 18th century. Eventually, the highly independent Newfoundlanders developed a great schooner fleet. The industries of fishing were tied to shipbuilding, to shipping and trade. This was the mid-1800s and became somewhat of a golden age of prosperity for the Maritimes. The schooner fleets sent out their fishermen in small boats called dories, and from these they harvested their catch of cod, halibut, and haddock. The speed of the schooners enabled the fishermen to catch their fish and to get them to market without spoiling. Along Canada's Atlantic coast today, there are still at least 1,000 communities that are mostly or wholly dependent upon fisheries. Most are hamlets of less than 500 people. Between Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, these communities account for 75 to 80% of Atlantic fish output, and it's here you'll find the Outport Man.
Fished the banks before he knew the wind and fog. He knew this blue Atlantic in his soul. The sea is only master, he played his youth away, waiting for those westerlies to blow. The capelet and the herring, they were his favorite bait. The schooner, it was his trusted friend. The heaving frosted heavy swell would cut and slash and spray. Oh, can we set our sails once again and haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, Outport man. Let's haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, Outport man.
In Newfoundland today, there are many part-time fishermen. Most depend on fisheries to supplement their income, and many of them, I believe, continue to participate because they are strongly attached to fishing as a way of life. It's part of their deep-rooted culture, their family tradition, and in many ways it defines their very identity. Fishing makes up about 65% of total income for most of these people. A major income supplement is unemployment insurance. This is something that all of the self-employed owner-operators and crews are entitled to. The average annual income is between $5,000 and $12,000, which of course is not an adequate personal income. Since World War I, the Atlantic fisheries have undergone great changes. It's now a rather uneasy alliance between the government, the big processing plants, and the independent fishermen. Fleet ownership by corporations involved in the fish processing has come to dominate the industry, which I suppose was inevitable. Atlantic fisheries was a $2.9 billion industry in 1985. There are 4 firms that now handle over 60% of the regional output of ground fish. About 40% of the fish are caught by their own fleets. These corporations account for 80 to 90% of the export trade and supply us with our convenience foods. Canada absorbs about 1/3 of the annual fish production, but the Canadian fish trade has always been strongly export-oriented. We are the biggest exporters of fish in the world. 60% goes to the U.S. market, about 20% to Japan, who provide almost exclusively the market for herring roe and eggs. Europe takes about 15%, mostly canned salmon, herring, and the Caribbean and Mediterranean countries continue to be a big market for salted and dried codfish. Refrigeration made a big difference to the fishing industry, and of course the introduction of radio, sonar, and radar in the 1940s. The fishing industry is always, it seems, going through periodic crises. Between 1959 and 1974, the big corporations multiplied their fleets 5 times. This incredible increase in capacity, combined with foreign and domestic fleets, naturally served to deplete the fish stocks and drive down incomes for our outport man. The big processors have developed fleets of over 50 large trawlers. These are ships that drag big conical nets along the bottom and scoop up everything that's there. Basically, what we've had is a boom-bust cycle in the Atlantic fishing from the 1960s right up to the present. The government passed the 200-mile limit law in the mid-70s, and this has made quite a difference. The fisheries themselves remain common property, so you've got each fisherman trying to carve out his share of the catch. Sometimes this makes for a lot of tension and occasional conflict.
There's a rock they call Virgio, there's freedom in the air, a way of life you can understand. Though we call you to our cities, I know you'll never stay, 'cause you were born to be an Outport man. The ice pack's breaking up at last, the sun is burning through, the boys are mending nets down at the cove. The fishing grounds are calling, come out to the show. So you're sitting safe and warm here by the stove. All the way, 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 Outport man. It's all the way, 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 Outport man.
2 companies currently dominate the offshore groundfish industry. Groundfish include the redfish, the flounder, crayfish, sea scallops, crab, and shrimp. The independent fishermen tried to control the supply in 1983, and there has been a lot of tension between the processing companies and the various unions, mainly the Newfoundland Fishermen, Food and Alliance Workers Union, and the Maritime Fishermen's Union. The Canadian Saltfish Corporation is a crown corporation that the federal government has set up, and it basically has a monopoly on the marketing of saltfish from Newfoundland. What the Newfoundlander and other maritime provinces have ended up with is an industry that alternates between expressions of independence and requests for government help. It has the built-in conflicts of private enterprise in a common property industry. Fortunately, the current interest in healthier eating habits has given a big boost to the seafood industry. The call of the sea is still strong in the Maritimes, particularly in Newfoundland. A whole way of life exists there, and it's all because of the incredible resource that is represented by the Atlantic fisheries. The crafts, the traditions, the cooking, art, and music of the Newfoundlanders all bear witness to their fierce pride in the unique and often difficult way of life. But I believe they will survive, and with proper management, the fisheries will too. It's a renewable resource, but it's going to require a tremendous amount of cooperation and wisdom between the governments, the corporations, and the fishermen to keep it alive. I, for one, love Newfoundland and what it represents to all Canadians. They are a warm and generous people whose hospitality is famed throughout the world. As long as there be fish in the sea by, may there continue to be an Outport man.
Safe inside the harbor, safe inside her arms, this fisherman is weary of the storm. Though he's worked with the big stern draggers in search of salty cod, this islander has come home to the wharf. And he has seen the seagulls fly, watched them come and go, following the boats that sail free. With your hand lines and your jiggers, you haul the fish away. Like them, you take your living from the sea. Haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, Outport man. Haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, Outport man. Your father fished the banks before he knew the wind and fog. He knew this blue Atlantic in his soul. The sea is only master, he played his youth away, waiting for those westerlies to blow. The capelin and the herring, they were his favorite bait. The schooner, it was his trusted friend. The heaving frost of heavy swell would cut and slash and spray. Oh, can we set our sails once again and haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, Outport man. Let's haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, Outport man. Travel this land to Hudson's Bay.
You've been traveling this land with Canada's singing storyteller, Whiz Bryant. Please feel free to write to us with your comments. We'd be delighted to hear from you. Thank you for listening, and join us again next time for another fascinating Canadian tale and story and song as we continue to travel this land.
And travel this land. Safe inside the harbor, safe inside her arms, this fisherman is weary of the storm. Though he's worked with the big stern draggers in search of salty cod, this islander has come home to the wharf. And he has seen the seagulls fly, watched them come and go, following the boats that sail free. With your hand lines and your jiggers, you haul the fish away. Like them, you take your living from the sea. Haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, Outport man. Haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, haul away, Outport man. Your father fished the banks before he knew the wind and fog. He knew this blue Atlantic in his soul. The sea is only master, he played his youth away, waiting for those westerlies to blow. The capelin and the herring, they were his favorite bait. The schooner, it was his trusted friend. The heaving frost of heavy swell would cut and slash and spray. Oh, can we set our sails once again and haul away?